Hello everyone, welcome back to RetroComms. Today we have a lineup of devices here that to some might appear to be completely random, to others might look a bit familiar, but to me is personal. That's right, each one of these devices was my daily use phone. Or at least an identical model. We might get to that later. Given that we're coming into the new year, it hit me that it has been about 20 years since I first started using my own personal phone. And being a collector, I thought it would be nice to look back at the history of my daily drivers. There might be another reason for that as well, but that will have to wait until the end. First off, let's start at the beginning with the Motorola V170. Looking around the device, we see a headphone jack up top, coaxial port for charging, as well as an LED charging indicator on the bottom, a back cover, which houses a removable battery and SIM card below, though this SIM card cannot be transferred to another device, and an external antenna, as was common for phones of the day, especially entry-level devices. Looking inside the device, we see a small yet legible display, as well as the typical keypad layout for Motorola flip phones of that time. This is a TracFone device, as mentioned earlier. The menu was basic, no fancy icons, no gimmicks, and not many features. It could call and it could text, and maybe play a couple simple games, but that was it. At the time, I was delighted to have my own phone and to be able to call and text relatives and friends at will. That being said, given that this was around 2006, there were devices out there with built-in cameras, the ability to send multimedia messages, and the ability to set custom ringtones and maybe even send those files via Bluetooth. And I had always wanted the iconic Motorola Razr. So after proving responsible with the V170, I ended up with this Motorola V3C on Alltel. Of course, I had to personalize the case with nail polish or whatever paint was lying around, as young girls were often prone to do in that time. Mini USB for charging, small speaker on the back, and some shortcut keys on the right. I believe that was for voice commands, and a volume keys and a camera button on the left. I'll try to open this device up without this top shell case falling completely off, which I'm having to hold that on now. It has seen better days. And inside, we are greeted with a large, bright screen, at least for the time, and that iconic Razr keypad layout, which was just tactile enough to where you knew where your thumb was at while texting without having to look down, especially once you got used to the device. It could also play games, which I had Ghouls and Ghosts, Bookworm, and Dance Dance Revolution 3D loaded onto this device. Ghouls and Ghosts and Bookworm were great, but I do not recommend trying to play DDR with a phone. This keypad, or any keypad really, is not suited, and trying to get the timing down, phones were not ready for it. Konami was certainly trying to cash in with that, which I've discussed that in a previous episode, but still neat to mention. We have a 1 megapixel camera up front, which was great for my use case at the time. I was not complaining at all. The ability to capture photos as I wanted was certainly a welcome addition compared to the V170. This device could also send MMS, and I could set custom ringtones, which of course I did, but I'll spare you a lot the embarrassment of the music I listened to when I was that age. And while I still have a soft spot for Razrs, as time progressed, those around me were starting to get smartphones. The appeal of having a device with multimedia support internet access, and of course, improved functions as a phone itself, was starting to become too great to ignore, even though I was hesitant to admit it, because I dearly loved this Motorola Razr. That said, when Christmas of 2010 rolled around, I was elated to find this laying under the tree waiting for me, the Motorola Droid 2 Global. Looking around the device, we see a micro USB for charging and data transfer, as well as an LED charging indicator. Up top, we have a 3.5mm headphone jack and a power button. On the right, we have two volume keys, and the bottom of the device is uneventful. Looking around back, there's a 5 megapixel camera, though you can't see the 5 megapixel branding under this case, which of course I had to personalize again, keeping my own little signature look during those days. And this rear speaker, which could have fared better. I must have dropped this device a couple of times when using it, because this does not look good. Also worth noting, I had to replace the digitizer on this device, as for some reason, even though it worked when I had put it away and I had powered it on to test it a couple of times before, the digitizer had failed. Fortunately, I found a donor and was able to get a digitizer on here, so now we can unlock it and have a look around. We have a control widget here, all of my educational type apps in this folder, which folders were quite a bit different back in those days, and my multimedia section here. All of my games, at least what remains of them. I guess I deleted some things to make space because I could have sworn I had a copy of Angry Birds on here. Who knows, it has been quite a while. And we can't ignore my favorite feature of this device, that QWERTY keyboard, which made text messaging and web browsing a breeze. Speaking of web browsing, this was the best experience I had had up to this point, because until I got this device, which had 3G support, all I had known was either satellite or dial-up, which were incredibly sluggish, even by the standards of the day. Having this device truly brought me into the modern era of phones. It didn't take long for me to upload my entire music library of CD rips to this device, as well as to fill up the SD card with various photos I had taken. Over that year and a half of use, it was truly a great phone, but Android itself was quite unstable. So it began to show its age. Certain apps started to lag, things started to freeze. That and 4G was on the horizon, and I wanted a piece of that action. So for my 16th birthday, I asked for the Droid 4, and fortunately, I received it. This was a continuation of Motorola's best features of the Droid series, with a full QWERTY keyboard complete with a number row, and genuinely a familiar layout compared to the Droid 2, with the headphone jack and power button on top, volume keys to the right, nothing going on the bottom except for that little microphone, and of course, still a micro USB for charging, but with the addition of this mini HDMI port, which I personally didn't get much use out of, but my relatives who had Droid Razr Max HDs did find opportunities to use theirs when showing photos or streaming sporting events on the big screen at family gatherings. The 4G internet was fast, the multimedia support was nice, everything flowed smoothly, especially at first. This is a rough recreation of my setup that I used back in that day. As many of you probably know, this is not my original Droid 4. But that's all right. This device is near identical to the one I was using, except with less wear on the keyboard. Mine has started to get worn here on this right side, where I guess I applied a bit too much force as I typed, which I was able to type fairly quickly on this device, and this is probably The fastest I could type on anything was with this. Looking around back, we see the rear camera, which was 8 megapixels, I believe. There's the little speaker. And though you can't see it, this device does not have a user replaceable battery, a first for me in all the phones that I'd owned. Sadly, as this device began to show its age, I wished for the ability to quickly remove the battery. As this phone began to lag and freeze about a year and a half in, very similar to how my Droid 2 Global went. So, given that this one was showing its age and a few of my relatives had already upgraded to this specific model, my eyes were on the Samsung Galaxy S5, which I asked for Christmas my senior year of high school, and fortunately received. Looking around, we see a vibrant display, which Samsung was known for at the time, and which is one of the features that drove me to choose this as the successor to my Droid 4 versus anything that Motorola was offering. That and the fact that this device still had an SD card slot and user replaceable battery, which came in handy later in the device's life. Looking around, the headphone jack placement is familiar right up top. There's a little infrared blaster. Volume keys on the left this time, which took me a little while to get used to, and the power button on the right. Looking down at the bottom, we see Samsung's proprietary port, which accepted micro USB on this side, and an additional little bit over here, which could act as a fast charging interface. Unlocking the screen, we see a setup that is very similar to the one that I was running at the time. I had to factory reset this one because my little brother needed to use it when he unfortunately damaged his Note 8. The utility apps are here, and my multimedia stuff is here. Oh, won't open that. Kind of similar to the setup that I ran previously, and very similar to the way I have my stuff set up today. This phone held up very well for almost 4 years until the glitches started to be too much to take. As battery percentage dropped, green lines would appear across the screen, especially if my display was at a low brightness. Sometimes the SD card wouldn't be read, which was quite concerning to me because I had pretty much my entire digital life on here. Of course, I routinely backed up to my laptop, but still, nobody wants to experience data loss. Fortunately, as things were getting worse, a relative of mine had an S7 that they were no longer using since they had upgraded to the S9. Unfortunately, that S7 was cracked, and I did a screen replacement. Foolishly, just the screen, not the frame. So the warp that existed in the original frame carried over to that new screen and caused it to crack from the inside, which I showed on another video. So of course the setup here is exactly the way I was running it when this was my daily device, because even if I wanted to, I couldn't have factory reset this thing. Trying to open this folder, there's all my utilities. And multimedia stuff over here. Looking around, it's very similar to the S5, with the volume keys over here on the left. Nothing up top this time except a brightness sensor and the SIM eject hole. On the right, there's the lock button. Home button down here, just as it was on the S5. And the headphone jack and micro USB down at the bottom of the device. During the process of trying to do the initial repair, I ended up clear modding this S7. Because 1, clear devices are neat, and 2, I guess I applied a bit too much heat trying to get in and removed some of the film from the back. So, in order to make a situation that was less than ideal a bit better, I just went ahead and clear modded this device. I wish I could have gotten more time with it. I think it would have been an excellent phone and could have gotten me many years of life, but that's not the way it went. I even had to go back to my S5 for a while after this one failed. It was only with me for about a month before that issue with the screen popped up. Fortunately, I didn't have to be back on the S5 for long because my wonderful partner gifted me this S8 Active. This is exactly as I left it. Circuit board themed wallpaper, custom font, all my sticky notes. Right here on the main screen, and swiping over, we have the multimedia sector. Very similar to the way I set things up previously. Looking around the device, we see that it is in a beefy case, which that is something I would do on the S5 and the S7. Both of these were in OtterBox Defenders when I was using them, but because of the fact that I store them in their original boxes that have matching numbers, I don't keep the OtterBoxes on these devices at this time for storage. This one will stay in its case though. We have the volume buttons and fortunately a recessed Bixby button on the left. Up top we've got the brightness sensor. On the right side of the device we have our power button. And down at the bottom we have our USB Type-C and headphone jack. Very familiar layout to the S7 and S5. So this was very easy to get used to, which is great because I used this device for 7 years, a little over 7 years. I got it at the start of November 2018, and well, I'll tell you what I replaced it with at the end of December of 25 here in a bit. But needless to say, this thing was an absolute powerhouse. And even then, even during its last couple of months, it was only a bit of lag and a few annoying glitches, and the fact that it was 7 years old that led me to upgrade. No slow, lagging, unstable Android like the two Motos, no weird screen related glitch like the S5, and no sudden bleeding through the display like the S7. Just a gentle sign of, hey, this device is getting old, you might want to retire it. Although, if I was desperate, I probably could have kept this going for at least another year. This thing is an absolute tank. But as I'm sure you can tell by the fact that I'm referring to it in the past tense, and as I've hinted to earlier, I have upgraded. To better explain this, I'm going to switch to my Galaxy S22, which I have used as a work device. That way I can show you exactly what I'm using right now. Given the fact that I find the ability to use wired audio devices and to expand my storage via micro SD card to be highly important, the successor to my long-standing S8 Active is none other than the Sony Xperia 1 Mark VI. I've already got my layout configured in a way that I'm used to, have loaded all of my songs onto the SD card, and have installed all my apps. That said, there are some things about this device that will take some getting used to. First off is the size. Even compared to the S8 Active, this thing is beefy. It is considerably longer, and in the case, just a tiny bit thicker, which we'll talk more about the case in a moment. That larger screen does make it easier to watch videos and to scroll through web pages, but it's a bit of a hassle as far as pocketing or carrying the device. I think it's more of a thing of needing to get used to the feel of this device in the hand as well. Because I've used the S8 Active for so long, anything else just feels completely foreign. And I've only had this phone for just over 2 weeks now. So let's look around the device. First off, we have the USB Type-C on bottom. Left side is completely bare. Up top, we've got the 3.5mm jack, as well as a brightness sensor. And over here on the right, we have the volume keys, power button, and a multifunction key, which I have set up to where a short press takes a screenshot and a long press launches the camera. I find myself taking a lot of accidental screenshots, though. That may change. Another reason why I chose this device is the fact that it boasts modern flagship specs and an impressive array of cameras. Those cameras do protrude off the back of the device quite a bit, so I needed a case that would protect them when I set the device down. That said, this case was something that I designed and 3D printed myself. Try as I might, I could not find a rugged case for this phone. Speaking of which, I will show you guys some time lapse of the 3D printing process while I give you guys some final words. I've done the math for 8 phones, including the new Sony, over 20 years, and that averages out to 2.5 years per phone, which is roughly in line with the national average, though that average is trending up. Sources say that it's because smartphones have gotten more durable or the hardware and software have improved, but I feel it's also due to the fact that there is a lack of innovation. There's not much of a need to upgrade every year or even every 2 years. You're perfectly fine keeping a device for 3, 4, 5, or even 7 years like the S8 Active. Although if you require a lot of security, if you do a lot of banking or financial stuff on your phone, that might not be advisable. That being said, that does include some outliers, like the 1 month for the S7 and the 7 years of the S8 Active, but such things balanced out in the end. And of course, I don't know the exact dates for the V170 and the Razr, but the Droid 2 and Droid 4 were both at about 1.5 years, which was more in line with the average at that time. And it may surprise you too. I'm sure that you would think a phone collector might change phones quite frequently, but for me, I get a slight attachment to each of these devices. They tell a part of my story. They were with me through significant life events. And when I find one that I truly enjoy, that I grow to appreciate, I am reluctant to let it go. The same can be said for pretty much every one of these phones. When it was upgrade time, I was a little bit hesitant. Except in cases like the S7 where I had no choice, or going from the S5 to the S8 Active, I was ready, I knew it was time. But of course, each of these, in their own way, had a great run. Now that being said, all this talk about my old mains has got me feeling nostalgic. Time for some milk and cookies, and maybe even booting up the PlayStation 3. Hope you guys enjoyed. This is RetroComms, signing off.